Hi, this is Frank Schaeffer. I grew up in an evangelical family. In fact, in the 1970s and 80s, my father, Francis Schaeffer, was perhaps the most influential evangelical theologian at the time, a best-selling author who also founded, I guess you could put it, along with C. Everett Koop, Ronald Reagan, Surgeon General, the Protestant evangelical fundamentalist wing of the pro-life movement. That's the background I came from, and I fled that background, including being my dad's nepotistic sidekick on the evangelism circuit, and got out of the movement completely in the late 1980s after my dad died. That's the perspective I bring to what I'm about to say. You know, we've just gone through the Easter holidays and the high holy days of Judaism and all the rest of it, and briefly the religious right and all these folks become news again because they want to hold church services or whatever in spite of the coronavirus and buck the system. They don't trust the government, they don't trust experts, they don't trust science. You know, the greeting in evangelical services on Easter is Christ is risen. And in more ancient liturgies, it's Christ is risen, and then after that you say something like, well, he is truly risen, or whatever. The fact of the matter is, it's time to look hard at what evangelicals have actually contributed to America. And I come from that background. Well, without evangelicals in America, we would be the leaders in challenging climate change and coming up with technological solutions. Evangelicals don't trust science, and they are the people who keep voting for Republicans who are all about funding billionaires and not doing anything about climate. What evangelicals have contributed, besides the fact that we're doing nothing about climate change because they elect Republicans, is that we have a healthcare system that is broken, with millions and millions of people with no health care and others with bad insurance or no insurance. You can thank an evangelical for the fact that our health system has been overwhelmed by COVID-19, because you can thank them for electing Donald Trump, but you can also thank them for years of mistrust of all social programs to help people. Evangelicals range between crazy libertarians on one side who carry guns and don't want anybody to tell them to do anything in terms of forming a community. Weird when you think they say they follow Jesus, who talk nothing but community and responsibility for others, to Republican business people who put anything ahead of individual responsibility for others. So that's two things. Without evangelicals, we would be the leaders in climate science and doing something about it, leading the world. Carbon emissions would be way down by now because there wouldn't have been one bedrock group for the last 25, 30 years keeping Republicans in power, sabotaging anything about climate change. Without evangelicals, we would have a national healthcare system that would work for people, probably with private insurance, as European countries have. By the way, Medicare for all with no insurance is not something that even the left-wing governments of Europe ever did. Of course, private insurance would always be part of the process. Without evangelicals, we would have a good school system. They would not have bailed out to their white academies as racists and segregationists at that time, and then since be all about homeschooling and defunding public education. There would be good public schools. Without evangelicals, in fact, public schools would be mandatory, as they are in most civilized, developed countries, without private schools siphoning off resources. Without evangelicals, we would have done something about the tax system that favors the rich and punishes the working poor. Without evangelicals voting again and again for Republicans in Congress and in the Senate, we would have a baseline minimum wage of $20 or $25 by now, annually adjusted for inflation. Without evangelicals, we would not have a loaded federal court system, and Supreme Court in particular, that seeks again and again and again and again to roll back gains by the gay community, the transgender community, the women's community, taking away choice, taking away rights, attacking all these things. Without evangelicals, in other words, America would be a decent country to live in. We would be a place that would not have a perpetual party of war in the military-industrial complex that draws on bogus ideas of nationalism, bogus ideas of sovereignty, bogus ideas of standalone America, the greatest country. Evangelicals talk about the fact that They say America is the greatest country on earth, and yet they have done everything to minimize the greatness of this country. We don't have a fast, rapid transit system or rail system in this country because of evangelicals. Evangelicals have voted for Republicans who again and again and again have sided with the auto industry, against mass transit, against public transportation. Evangelicals are the bane of this country. In the 2020 election coming up, it will be evangelicals who are trying to gerrymander and hang on to the white supremacy movement against both minorities, but also women and urban voters, by doing everything from trying to stop voting by mail, as Donald Trump is doing, even trying to destroy the United States Post Office. By the way, parenthetically, post office are a mark of civilization. Ask a Roman, ask any civilized nation on earth that has ever had a workable system of government, whether they had a postal system. They all did, all the way back into antiquity. Without evangelicals, we would not have a gerrymandered system across the country favoring minorities, putting them in power through the Electoral College when the majority vote by millions is trying to throw these people out. Evangelicals are now the bane of the United States. They may tell each other that Christ is risen, but clearly they don't believe it. Or they would read some of the teachings of Jesus Christ that fly directly in the face of everything evangelicals have come to represent as the cult party of Trump. So in 2020, when we vote against Donald Trump and for Democrats, remember this: we are voting for the essence of the teachings of Jesus Christ and against the evangelicals who say Christ is risen, but actually have kept him crucified and dead and buried more than any other party in this country. Thank you. My name is Frank Schaeffer.